Hello, let's talk about some key film terms and concepts. I'm not going to cover everything. This is not going to be an exhaustive list, but I do want to make sure that you have a grounding in some of the basic terminology as we move into the beginning of film history. This film actually is from about the midpoint in film history. This is a French New Wave film by Agnes Varda, in which she examines the perfect family, quote unquote, and kind of unpacks what you see on the surface. It's not unlike, in this respect, Far From Heaven or American Beauty, Pleasantville, some other films that have done things similarly, but this film does it first, or at least before these other films. All right, let's examine frame rate. Okay. So we are accustomed to seeing 24 frames per second on the screen. And when it is not 24 frames per second, it feels a little bit odd. So this has been the standard for over 100 years. Films that are projected at 24 frames per second because they have been recorded at 24 frames per second. Now, the TV standard is a little bit smoother than that, 30 frames per second. All right, this has been the standard for quite some time, and remains the standard for TV, news, and web casting and that kind of thing. Peter Jackson tried in 2012 48 frames per second, so doubling what we were accustomed to on screen. And it was so smooth and so realistic that people balked at it. There were a few who liked it, but many did not. And so that did not become an industry standard. 60 frames per second is what high definition does. And I have to admit that sometimes when I watch something this smooth, it feels like I'm looking through a window at actual people. And it's a little bit discomforting for me, and maybe for some others too. If you shoot it 150 or 300 frames per second, you're probably not going to play it back at that rate. You're shooting it at this rate so you can play it back more slowly if you have a slow motion scene like that at the beginning of Antichrist in Lars von Trier's notorious film. All right, the illusion of continuous movement, despite the brief interruptions, is called persistence of vision. So we perceive 24 frames per second as uninterrupted, even though part of us recognizes that there are small breaks between each frame. And this is something that we are accustomed to and that we apparently actually like. Let's talk about aspect ratios. Now, when films first began, they were close to being a square. Not quite a square, elongated a little bit, right? A bit of a rectangle at 133. This is the standard for quite some time and is going to be the standard on television for a while. 1.37 is actually not wider. It technically is wider, but it's wider to accommodate the soundtrack, right? So the sound that accompanies the film, and this appears in the late 20s with the appearance of the jazz singer, which is the first to do this in a really memorable way. So still pretty boxy. Then we have an attempt to really move outside of what TV is now replicating quite well in the domestic space of many homes, and to create a theatrical experience. So people start going back to the theater and aren't satisfied with the television. So CinemaScope was a film about Jesus Christ that came out in 1953. And it was very expensive to make, but it definitely created a spectacle, right? This is not something that you could find on your TV screen. And then we have something wider than 133, but not quite 235, 166, or sometimes called 53, which is the modern European standard. It's not as wide as the American standard, but it is a little bit wider. And I'm going to give you examples, visual examples of all of these in just a second, just kind of introducing you to some ideas. 1.85 is the modern American film standard. This is what most films to this day appear in. Now, sometimes there are exceptions. Sometimes a film will have multiple aspect ratios because it's been cut different ways. On the Waterfront is an example of this. Very famous film from the 50s, which was shot in 1:3:3, but then a mask was applied to cut it down to something that was more theatrical, right? So it has appeared in 1:6:6 and 1:8:5. And just think about it. If something is boxier, you're going to get more close-ups. If the whole film has been choreographed in a way to anticipate this aspect ratio, you're going to have a lot of close-ups. You're going to have people standing close to one another. They're going to be kind of scrunched together if it's a group shot, right? If something is wider, you can space the characters out a little bit more and still have them all in frame. And if you take something that was shot in 1:3:3 and then push it this direction and make it wider, longer, you're going to start cutting off parts of people's heads, and you're not going to see as much of their shoulders or chest or how much of their body appeared in the original. So it definitely changes things. Some aspect ratios are more intimate, some are more epic, right? We often find very wide aspect ratios used for war films. Ben-Hur is an example of this. Although Tarantino's The Hateful Eight also went really wide, Super Panavision 70mm. This is a 2.76. This is, if you'll forgive the ableist bit of figure of speech, it is crazy wide. This is so unusual that it really draws attention to itself. And this was a rather intimate film, The Hateful Eight, right? It takes place inside a carriage and then inside a cabin. So odd for something that intimate to be that wide. 178 is the current HD TV standard. I will say that 276 has been used to incredible effect in films like Sarah Polley's Women Talking, very recent film about sexual assault and the aftermath of that, and a response to that kind of violence, and an attempt that some of the characters are attempting to forgive their attackers and at the same time protect themselves and be true to their own experience. So it's a very complicated, emotionally complicated film. Some filmmakers move among various aspect ratios. Lars von Trier, the Danish auteur, is a pretty good example of this. I teach an entire class on his films, and so I'm in a position to list some very different things that he's done, from, let's see, The Idiots here, which is the European standard aspect ratio, all the way to something like The House That Jack Built, which is the hardest of his films to watch. It is terrifying on multiple levels. I'm not going to recommend it to anyone, although it has some intriguing things in it. It has a lot of images that you will have difficulty getting out of your head. Lots of violence. It's basically about a serial killer who tries to turn his victims into art. So you can imagine where that goes. Okay, let's look at some examples. So this is the boxy 1:3:3, and is often referred to as just 4:3, right? This aspect ratio. And this was the standard in silent film and television until the advent of HD. I still occasionally, just the other day, I watched a film that was released in the 90s on DVD before HD had become widespread, and it was cut in 1:3:3. It had a wider aspect ratio too, if people wanted it, 1:8:5, but it had been shot in 1:3:3, so you could watch it either way, depending on which side of the disc you flipped it to. So I know I'm really dating myself here, but some of us still own DVDs as well as Blu-rays. Okay, so 1:3:7, remember, that's the same as 1:3:3. It just means that now we have the audio track running alongside the image. And Bergman's films are usually this aspect ratio. Sam Mendes' war film, 1917, is a pretty good example of going wide to get more action. So you see people running amok all over, not just your central figure. 2:3:5 allows for much to be captured this off to the sides. Now, if you want to really get inside someone's head, there's a lot of interiority, and this very creepy film, The Shining, an adaptation of Stephen King's novel, which he did not like, but is considered a classic, one of Kubrick's best-known films, then you're going to go for something that's a little boxier than 1:8:5, towards 1:6:6. So we have a lot of close-ups of this guy as he loses his mind. And in Jojo Rabbit, we have the standard. Okay, so we are able to get two people here close and still a bit of their surroundings. So we recognize that they're in what looks like a schoolroom. This is Polly's Women Talking, and this is one of the opening shots of the film. Very, very wide. Why would she do this in a film that is slow-paced? It's not an action film. It deals with a lot of inner turmoil. One of the reasons I believe that she uses this is not just for these gorgeous panoramic images of the exteriors, of the surroundings of this small village, but also because it allows for these incredible tableaus of women gathering alongside one another to comfort one another. There's a few of those moments. If you see this film, watch for those moments. It's one of my favorite J.J. Abrams productions. Fewer people know about this one than know about, say, Lost or Alias, but this is a very good successor to The X-Files, if you like sci-fi. Fringe, and this is the TV standard 178. Okay, now when we say mise en scène, mise is from the French verb mettre, is the infinitive. It means to put. When you say mise en scène, you're referring to everything that is put inside the frame. This refers to the set, to the subjects, to everything that you see bounded within the frame. Here, 4-3. This is from Rope. This is an important framing of this moment because we have two characters, I'm not spoiling anything here, two characters who've just murdered someone. This happens right at the beginning of the film. They wrap a rope around someone and pull it tight, and then place his body inside this cabinet here, which is then going to become the centerpiece for a dinner party which is being thrown. So lots of suspense in this film by the master of suspense, Hitchcock. Let's talk about different sorts of camera lenses. Now, a normal lens, so-called, is approximating what the eye sees. The best lens to capture what a person would actually see if they were standing in front of a subject is a 50mm fixed lens. Okay, so it's not going to go in and out. It's not a telephoto lens, but 50mm is closer to what the eye sees than, say, 35mm. A wide-angle lens is going to distort the image. Now, oftentimes we want to see someone's surroundings in a closed space. If you shot someone inside a car, like in the back seat of a truck, like during a heist film, right? So a back security truck that's moving money. You would use a wide-angle lens because you want to see not just one figure, but who's next to them and a bit of their surroundings. And that's going to involve stretching the image, particularly towards the edges. So notice how the edges here are stretched as she comes up this escalator. And Godard's Breathless. This is a very well-known French New Wave film. Much of it is incredibly fast-paced and quickly edited. So it's a stylized effect. It's a choice that is going to draw attention to itself as not realistic. This is not the way the human eye perceives things. Also, when you have a wide-angle lens, because it is bending things and making objects that are this far apart actually look closer than they are, okay, what's going to happen is if somebody moves rapidly from left to right or right to left, they're going to look like they're moving faster than they actually are because of the distortion. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Also, there's a very large depth of field with a wide-angle lens. You're going to see a lot of different things in focus simultaneously. You'll notice that the legs of these chairs are not blurred out, right? There's a lot that's in focus here that's behind the subject. A fisheye lens is another choice, stylistic choice, that you find in films like Kubrick's A Space Odyssey. Von Trier uses this in about a fifth of the way through Antichrist when he's capturing someone's anxiety. Oh, actually, no, I'm sorry. That's a I'm anticipating a different scene. A fisheye lens is going to distort things in a very dramatic way by wrapping the image around, almost like the image has been wrapped around a sphere, right? It's going to look like this. A lens baby lens. This is what I was getting at a second ago. We find it in von Trier's Antichrist, and more recently in Yorgos Lanthimos' Poor Things. Again, because this is not the way the eye sees things, it's more for dramatic effect when you're trying to create an otherworldly sense of things or capture someone's altered sense of reality. So it can be very interior. You're actually capturing someone's altered perceptions or their emotional state. Right? This is not about a high degree of fidelity. What a lens baby does is, and I have a couple of these lenses myself, is it takes a very small point of focus and then it blurs things out to the sides. All right. Sometimes it's an even smaller area of focus than this. It could be just, say, just the eyes or one eye. Okay, if you put a diffuser lens on a camera or place a diffuser over the lens, what you're going to do is create a softer effect, right? Another way to do this is through imperfect focus, soft focus. So with a diffuser lens, you're actually trying to make a figure look more romantic usually. And this is used to what seems to me, watching this now, rather comedic effect. It's not intended to be comedic in the 60s with Star Trek. So in some of these early original Star Trek episodes, you have reverse shots, sometimes over the shoulder, between two different characters who are looking at one another. One of them is Kirk, one of them is a woman. And invariably, Kirk, the captain of the Enterprise, is clear. And then you cut to the woman who's soft because of a diffuser or soft focus, right? To make her look a little hazier, a little more dreamy, and presumably exotic and attractive. You can add a filter to change the color of something. This can be done in post these days with HD, right? If you shoot it digitally, then you can do all this after the fact. But back in the day, they would actually put a colored filter over the lens to turn something red, yellow, green, blue. And in fact, this is von Trier's graduation film, and he uses all those colors in creating this film. This is about a Danish group of resistance fighters after World War II who betray and gouge out the eyes of a Nazi soldier. Let's see. Okay, this is from the infamous Birth of a Nation, 1915, a very disturbing film on many levels. This is an example of tight framing. Okay, so what we have here is one subject, a little bit of the background. She's about to fall off a cliff here, and you see how high off the ground she is. But it's relatively tight framing. You don't see a lot of her surroundings to left and right. And Alejandro González Iñárritu's The Revenant is about someone who is mauled by a bear and somehow survives. Leonardo DiCaprio stars in this film, which wants to make sure that you are never unaware of his surroundings, which is why a wider angle is used here. A wider aspect ratio, I should say. This is loose framing, right? Where you don't just get the subject, but you also see some of the terrain that he's trying to navigate as he's, has no resources and is close to starvation a few times, and it's very, very cold. If you have two characters who are in a kind of balanced relationship and seem to be on the same playing field, there's no clear power imbalance, you might use symmetrical composition to suggest that. And at this moment in Dogville, these two characters are moving towards friendship. That is not the case later on. In Oscar Micheaux's Within Our Gates, we have here a character who's moving in from the left, that creates a pull. It creates tension towards this direction. So if it were just these two figures right here, we would have symmetrical composition, but she throws things off in more ways than one. Visually here, but she's also plotting. She's a bit duplicitous at this moment in the film, and is going to show her duplicity more and more as the film progresses. This is split screen, and it's usually used, and I say usually, it's pretty rare. We find it most often in, say, romance films where people are talking on the phone. You see this a lot in a lot of films from the 50s, where somebody picks up the phone and suddenly it becomes a split screen, and you see both of them, or they're thinking of one another and they're on opposite sides of a wall or something like that, right? Or in different locations, but it looks like they're on opposite sides of a single wall. Here, Ang Lee uses this, I think, very effectively, because he's trying to create, this is pre-Iron Man. This is an early Marvel film. It's not created by Marvel. I'm probably Sony or someone like that had access to the Hulk at this time. And the film is an attempt to recreate the blocky sense that you get with comic books. I don't know how many of you have never cracked open a comic book. Shame on you. Or a graphic novel, at least, maybe, hopefully, or a manga or something, right? You're going to have multiple images presented simultaneously on a screen. And so the eye moves back and forth between them, particularly in a film. If it's a manga, you're reading right to left, or a comic book, you're reading left to right, top to bottom. So the eye learns to move in a certain direction, but with a film, it's harder to keep your eye moving left to right. It's kind of bouncing back and forth between these competing frames. High key lighting, and this only looks dark in the corners because of the way it's been slightly masked here, but this is pretty high key lighting. We don't have a lot of shadows on this figure or the figure standing behind him. This is from Fritz Lang's Metropolis, a very important German expressionist film from the mid-20s about artificial intelligence. Seems very timely. Low-key lighting allows for very stark contrasts between light and dark. So here we see in this early silent film from Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This is one of the adaptations that came out around this time. And famously stars Drew Barrymore's grandfather in the title role. Here we see him for the first time presumably for the first time, gazing upon a dancer. She's an exotic dancer who's showing off the way her body moves and showing a bit of skin, and he's really taken by her. Thus the reddish tinge, because a filter's been used here, and the stark lighting that makes his eyes look a little bit creepy. And the back part of him is just dissolving into the darkness, which he is about to inhabit, metaphorically speaking, when he becomes Mr. Hyde. Side lighting can do a number of things. It can suggest that someone is conflicted, right? Like if one side of their face is in darkness and the other side is in light, perhaps there is internal conflict. Or it could suggest that they are purposefully deceiving others. It has an ominous feel to it. And here we have someone who is creeping towards a victim. This person has been victimized by prejudice, by stigma for many years, and is engaged in an act of vengeance. Right? I'm not going to give you any indication of what's going on in this film at Avengers Endgame, and if you haven't seen this, I don't know what to tell you. I'm very sorry. You should see all the Marvel films up to this point. Most of them are definitely worth your time. One of my favorites is Captain America: Winter Soldier. Another favorite is Black Panther. If you haven't seen any Marvel films, because they're comic movies, I would say that you're letting prejudice get in your way. You should definitely try out some of these films. Backlighting often shadows the subject, right? And suggests that there is a lot going on behind them which they are not currently a part of. Something else is happening. This often draws us into a very, very private space with the subject. Bottom lighting, this is obvious, right? You do this with a flashlight, or I guess these days with a cell phone, at a campfire to make yourself look even more creepy than the campfire itself. The illumination that it creates is going to create that effect already, right? And so this is the bad guy from It, lit from below, and to get the opposite effect, you light from above, as if someone has been illuminated by the sun, or a divine light, which is often associated with the sun. And here we have a shot of the cross in the background, and a Christian martyr who is willing to die instead of renouncing what she believes to be true, in Carl Dreyer's very famous silent film, Joan of Arc. Sometimes you can actually see enough of the pupils to get a catch light. Catch lights can be a single source of light, or they can be multiple sources of light. In Peter Jackson's The Fellowship of the Ring, Galadriel is lit in such a way that you see multiple points of light in her pupils, like as if there were many, many stars behind her, right? So a very ethereal kind of look. This is an effect which draws us towards someone, as if they're some illumination is radiating out from them. If the eyes are the windows to the soul, then this suggests that sometimes that there's something good within those eyes. Definitely the case in Johnny Belinda with this character. An extreme long shot. So now we're talking about camera shots. An extreme long shot is going to capture a lot of the environment surrounding a subject. So this is the closing shot of Ingmar Bergman's Wild Strawberries. It's capturing a memory that one of the characters is having, as they recall their parents fishing and having a picnic. If you zoom in a little bit more, then we have what's a long shot. Still, you're getting quite a bit of the environment, and this is a character in being there as he steps out of the home that he has inhabited for many decades without stepping foot outside that space. So you can see him looking about and trying to make sense of his surroundings. A medium shot gets in a little bit closer in a patch of blue. This woman, played by a seeing actor who's actually wearing contacts to make her blind, she's playing a blind character, is being led by her father through the streets she's not very familiar with, because she's usually kept inside the house or inside the flat where they live in this urban space. A medium shot captures a character from the knees or the waist up, and the setting is pretty well established. But if we move even closer, it often becomes difficult to figure out what the environment is. We see some trees in the background, but we don't really know what space this is. Is it a front yard, a backyard? Is it a park? We can't tell because so much of the subject is filling the frame. A close-up really doesn't give you anything of the environment, and this is usually going to be very shallow focus, so our attention is going to be here on the eyes and nose. You'll notice that the shoulders and even the ear are starting to blur out because the focus point is very shallow. There's not a lot of depth in the shot. This is towards the beginning of Cléo de Saint-Cassette, another one of Agnes Varda's films. A character who's considering her mortality, as we find out right at the outset. And if you go in even closer, you get something like this. This is that shot I was referring to earlier with Galadriel in the Fellowship of the Ring, where we see lots of different catch lights, lots of different lights inside the pupils, and bouncing off the iris here as well. In an extreme close-up, you're going to get part of a hand, or maybe an ear, or a knee, or something. You're not going to get all of a head. You're going to be drawn into an uncomfortable familiarity with a particular part of someone's body. An establishing shot is often an extreme long shot or a long shot, and is going to give us a bit of the environment surrounding a character, much of the setting where things are going to take place. And this character with the scythe sets up the idea of death being imminent, being just around the corner in this Gothic film by Carl Dreyer, which is based on, actually loosely based on a couple short stories from the mid-20th century by J.S. Le Fanu, the Irish writer, if you're interested in that kind of thing. This predates Bram Stoker's Dracula. And this shot, reverse shot, we see two people having a conversation, right? We move from this shot to this shot. This is not a split screen shot. I don't know if you can tell that there's a black bar running behind them. I'm just showing you them simultaneously. This shot is followed by this shot, right? Each of them taking up the full screen. And this is commonly used when two people are having a conversation. It captures the perspective of the listener as they're hearing someone else speak, or vice versa. An over-the-shoulder shot is very similar to a shot reverse, but here we're actually able to see part of one of the characters, oftentimes the one who is not talking, the one who is listening. This is from Tommy Lee Jones' The Sunset Limited, a very intimate film based on a play by Cormac McCarthy, and all of it takes place, is shot in a single apartment building, with Tommy Lee Jones, the director, and Samuel L. Jackson. A masked shot is a shot where we're not seeing everything that would normally be viewable through the camera that's taking the image. Instead, we're given signs that we're looking through something, a periscope or a microscope or a telescope, or here binoculars. This is Luke Skywalker looking across the landscape on Tatooine because he's trying to find R2-D2 who has disappeared in the first of the Star Wars films. Highly recommend. And even more so, the second film, The Empire Strikes Back. In Lars von Trier's Antichrist, we have a character who's dealing with grief and depression, and this is a bird's eye or God's eye shot from directly above, as she is imagining herself sinking into the ground. Oftentimes, you're not going to be able to manage this kind of shot just by standing over someone, because there'd be a slight angle. So instead, you put the camera on a crane and shoot from directly above your subject. If you shoot someone from below, that gives the subject a lot of power, right, relative to your own subject position. So in this film, Children of the Lesser God, we have a character who is a master, presumably, at teaching lip reading, and he's at a school for the deaf, and he's trying to encourage many of the deaf students there to assimilate, right, to not only read lips but actually speak themselves. And so he's a little bit resistant to relying on ASL, or American Sign Language, although he does know a bit of it. This suggests that he's in a position of power and influence by shooting him from below. An eye-level shot puts us on the same playing field of a character. Here's another French New Wave film by Truffaut, and brings us into their space. This youngster is going to break all kinds of rules and some laws, and we are supposed to identify with him. Instead of standing apart from him and judging him, we are experiencing many of these things with him and reveling with him in this newfound freedom. So the eye-level shot puts us on that same playing field. A high-angle shot suggests that we or someone else is in a position of superiority or power over someone that is being diminished by the agent of that power. And here, unfortunately, we have the wife of a man who is rather emotionally abusive, who is manipulating her in the very famous film Gaslight. And if you don't know this film, but you're using the word gaslight, you should probably watch the film so you know where the terminology came from, and so you can use it correctly. Right? So you shoot from above a subject to steal agency from them. A canted angle means that instead of shooting this way, you've moved the angle this way, right? This way or this way. It's very disorienting, right? And in this moment from Scott Derrickson's The Exorcism of Emily Rose, Emily is running from demons who are trying to possess her, right? And to suggest the distress that she's feeling, the camera has been moved to a diagonal position. All right. Please familiarize yourself with these terms. Look back over this video a few times during the quarter if you need to. There are other terms that are coming your way on handouts and so on. Make sure that you know how to use these terms well and accurately.